See, what you got to remember is this. I am not, or never have been, a danger to the public. All crimes out there are very, very minimal. My dangerousness is inside, not outside. I could be released tomorrow. I'm making a nice little living out of my art. What winds me up is people like the Yorkshire River, when they got the human rights barristers and QCs. What about Charles Bronson's human rights? Hey, 36 years in the ken. 21 when I come in. I'm 58 now. I've only been home 3 months in all that time. Do me a favour. What about my human rights? It's about time people woke up and smelt the shit.
Charles Bronson was born in Luton, Bedfordshire. He lived in Luton from the age of 4, but when he was a teenager, he moved with his family to Cheshire, where he started getting into trouble. By the age of 13, he was a part of a gang of 4 robbers and was reprimanded in juvenile court after he was caught stealing. He enjoyed fighting from an early stage and was often absent from school. Bronson later returned to Luton, which he refers to as his hometown. His first job was at Tesco, which lasted 2 weeks before he was dismissed for attacking his manager. He passed through a number of jobs, working in a couple of factories here and there. Bronson then worked as a furniture remover. Whilst working there, he always got into fights on nights out. After getting involved in petty crime, he got into some serious trouble for the first time after crashing a stolen lorry into a car. At the age of 19, he was convicted for his part in a smash and grab raid, but was given one last chance by the judge, who gave him a suspended sentence. Bronson was convicted of armed robbery in 1974, just aged 22, and sentenced to 7 years imprisonment. He was sent to HMP Liverpool and soon ended up in the punishment block after attacking 2 prisoners without even being provoked. He was then transferred to Hull in 1975. He then attacked fellow prisoner John Henry Gallagher with a glass jug and was charged with grievous bodily harm. He was then transferred to HMP Leeds. As he spent between 1975 and 1977 being switched between Armley, Wakefield, Parkhurst and Walton prisons, he was taken from Yorkshire to London, chained to the floor of a prison van. He remained in isolation and began his fitness program, though he continued to attack other convicts and damage prison property. Whilst at Wandsworth Prison, he attempted to poison a prisoner in the cell next to him, and was therefore moved to Parkhurst in 1976. That's where he befriended the Cray twins, who he described as being the best 2 guys that he's ever met. Bronson was soon moved back to Wandsworth after threatening to kill a prison officer. He spent 4 months in isolation after he was caught trying to dig his way out of his cell. After being returned to the prison's general population, he caught up with the prisoner who had informed the guards of his escape plan, and then scarred him for life. The governor at Wandsworth wished to move Bronson on. Bronson found himself back at the Isle of Wight. There he attacked a prisoner with a jam jar, and was again charged with grievous bodily harm. He attempted suicide and attacked another prison officer and was sectioned under the Mental Health Act. In 1978, Bronson arrived at Broadmoor, but was soon transferred to Rampton Secure Hospital. Unable to adapt to forced medication and in the company of highly disturbed and highly dangerous inmates, Bronson attempted to strangle the child sex murderer, John White. He was returned to Broadmoor and reunited with Ronnie Cray. Bronson attempted to strangle Gordon Robinson to death, but was prevented from doing so when the silk tie he was using to strangle him with snapped. Following this failure, Bronson again became depressed, but found his spirits lifted when Ronnie Cray arranged a visit from a boxer, Terry Downs. In 1982, he performed his first rooftop protest after escaping to the top of Broadmoor and tearing off the roof tiles. Not long after the first incident, he again reached the roof of Broadmoor. This time he caused over £250,000 worth of damage in a 3-day protest. He was eventually talked down by his family. He then started an 18-day-long hunger strike and was eventually granted a transfer to Ashworth Hospital. Back then it was known as Park Lane Hospital, in June 1984. In 1986 he was transferred 8 times, the only new location being Winchester. On the 3rd of January 1987 he was again transferred to Gartree, where he served the rest of his sentence in isolation. Upon his release from Gartree, he was met by his family and stayed with his parents for a few days. He then took a train to London, bought a water pistol, modified it, and then used it to intimidate a stranger into driving him to Luton. Bronson then embarked on a short-lived career in illegal bare-knuckle boxing in the East End of London. He changed his name officially from Michael Peterson to Charles Bronson in 1987. To the surprise of his girlfriend at the time, Alison, for New Year's Day 1988, he robbed a jewellery shop, kept a ring for her, and then sold the rest on. On the 7th of January 1988, his 69th day of freedom, he was apprehended and arrested on his morning jog. He was returned to Leicester Prison, as Bedford Prison refused to house him on the account of his uncontrollable behaviour during his first stretch in prison. He made a failed bid to reach the prison's roof and was transferred to Brixton. Bronson was placed in a top secure unit of 16 prisoners at Brixton, and in June 1988 he pleaded guilty to armed robbery and was sentenced to 7 years. Bronson was taken back to Wandsworth before being transferred to Full Sutton. There he spent time in isolation for punching a prisoner and a prison officer after throwing water on the governor. He also spent a month at Durham, where he bonded with a family of rodents that crept into his cage. In 1989 he was moved to Long Lartin and settled in well at the prison until he went over the edge and ran riot in the nude, clutching onto a spear he fashioned out of a broken bottle and a broom handle. After another incident where Bronson started a one-man riot, he was put back into isolation. He then spent 2 months at Bristol before moving to Birmingham and then Winchester and then back to Wandsworth in September 1989. He was moved on the regular and also in trouble quite a lot, particularly when he punched 2 prison officers at Gartree and took the deputy governor hostage. However, at Parkhurst, he was on the receiving end of an attack. When at least 2 prisoners stabbed him in the back several times, Bronson refused to speak to the police. He could not get into any trouble while recovering from the attack and was then released from prison in November 1992. Bronson spent only 53 days as a free man before being arrested again, this time for conspiracy to rob. On February 1993, the charges of robbery were dismissed and he was given a £600 fine for breaking the nose of his current girlfriend, Kellyanne's lover. 16 days later, he was arrested again for conspiracy to rob and possession of a sawn-off shotgun. On remand in Woodhill, he took a civilian librarian hostage and demanded an inflatable doll, a helicopter, and a cup of tea from the police negotiators. He released the hostage after being disgusted when he broke a window in front of him. He was taken from Belmarsh to Bullingdon Prison for his trial. For the trial, he pleaded guilty for possessing the shotgun, but not guilty for the conspiracy charges, and told the jury that he intended to use the shotgun to blow his own head off. On September 14th, 1993, he was found guilty of intent to rob and not guilty of conspiracy to rob. While his co-defendant was found innocent of all charges, Bronson was given an 8-year sentence. Bronson was taken from Belmarsh to Wakefield, where he spent 40 days naked in isolation. He was transferred to Hull in November, where he spent a number of months without incident before he took Deputy Governor Adrian Wallace hostage on Easter Monday 1994. He was overpowered following a moment of lapsed concentration and was moved to Leicester. He then returned to Wakefield where he was put in the infamous Hannibal cage, which was previously occupied by Robert Maudsley. While there, prison officers Mick O'Hagan and Alan Jarvis encouraged him to take up art. His father died in September 1994. During a difficult period for Bronson, where he endured constant solitary confinement and almost weekly moved, he attacked the governor at Highdown, who had felt safe enough to visit Bronson on his own, telling his prison officers that he's okay with me. At Lincoln, he was allowed to spend time with Down syndrome children and was taken out of solitary and placed back on the prisoner wings, but was soon put back into isolation after returning from a 30 minutes exercise 30 minutes late. In April 1996, he was sent back to Belmarsh for taking a doctor hostage at Birmingham. 5 months later, an Iraqi hijacker bumped into him in the canteen and did not apologise. After a long period of brooding, he then took the 2 hijackers, along with another inmate named Jason Greasley, hostage into a cell. By his own admissions, he was losing it badly, and ranted about his dead father, saying that any funny business would result in him snapping necks. He sang and laughed and forced the hijackers to tickle his feet and got them to call him General. He demanded a plane to take him to Libya, 2 Uzi submachine guns and 5,000 rounds of ammunition, and an axe. He released Greasley, but then began chanting, "I want ice cream." He felt guilty after hitting one of the hostages with a metal tray, and therefore insisted that the same hostage hit him over the head 4 times, just to call it quits. He slashed himself 4 times with a safety razor, but agreed to release the hostages and walk back to the segregation unit. Another 7 years were added to his sentence, though this was reduced to 5 on an appeal. In January 1999, he took Phil Danielson, a civilian educational worker, hostage as he criticised one of Bronson's drawings. This siege lasted 44 hours before he released Danielson. He was then transferred to Whitemoor. Later, in 1999, a special prison unit was set up in Woodhill for Bronson, Robert Maudsley and Reginald Wilson to reduce the risk they posed to staff and other prisoners. In 2007, Bronson remained a Category A prisoner when he was moved to Wakefield High Security Prison. On February 2014, he violently attacked a prison governor in a television room in HMP Woodhill over a dispute that his mail was being withheld, including 2 letters from his mother. The governor suffered serious bruising. In July 2014, Bronson was sentenced to 2 years. The prison had accepted that his mail may have been unacceptably processed. In August 2014, Bronson announced that he was changing his name via depot to Charles Salvador, in tribute to the artist Salvador Dali. In a handwritten statement on his website, Salvador stated that the old me dried up. Bronson came alive in 1987. He died in 2014.